Rain hits different when you're holding a baby, you know what I mean? It sneaks through the seams of your jacket and counts your mistakes out loud. And that day in Los Angeles, I was under a broken bus shelter, trying to keep my daughter Hope dry, when a town car slid to the curb, and a man in a suit looked at me like he was seeing a person, not a problem. And before I could decide whether to run, he pressed a cold key into my hand and said, "Take my house." I know how that sounds like a scam or a test, but his eyes were tired in a way money doesn't fix. And when he said his name was Christopher, and that he was leaving for a business trip, and this big empty house needed someone to breathe inside it, I believed him, not because I'm naive, but because sometimes kindness shows up wearing the exact face you would never let yourself imagine. And yeah, that happened. I took a cab with his cash, and the driver looked at me like the punchline to a joke. And still I climbed those marble steps and turned the lock, and the heat rolled through the vents like a long exhale. And I fed my baby, and I cried over a sandwich, like it was a miracle that burned my nose with mustard. And I told the woman in the wedding photo on the hall table, "Thank you," even though she was gone. The note on the fridge said, "Sue the card for what you need. CB and the number for Mrs. Patterson was written under twos and F Rye, so I called with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and she laughed this soft grandmother laugh and said, "Did he hand you the keys in a storm? Then you're exactly where you're supposed to be." And just like that, I wasn't alone. I was still broke and scared and exhausted. But I wasn't alone, and the next morning I decided to pay rent, the only way I knew how. I started cleaning. Like care could be a currency, I moved. Nothing sacred. I just wiped grief off surfaces like dust. I stacked the mail by date. I opened the windows that were stuck and let the light move through like it owned the place. Mrs. Patterson showed up Friday with warm eyes and a lifetime of knowing where everything belongs. She told me about Rebecca, Christopher's wife, how the sunroom used to be her favorite, how the house had gone quiet after cancer took her, how Christopher kept breathing but stopped living, and we made coffee while Hope banged a wooden spoon on the table, and I told the truth about the shelters and the nights on chairs that sucked the heat out of your bones, about the boyfriend who left a folded stack of bills and a timeline. I refused about how it feels when the world looks through you and Mrs. Patterson squeezed my hand and said, "You kept your baby safe, say it out loud," so I did. And then I opened a laptop and enrolled in a free GED course because if somebody hands you keys, you better make sure you can unlock the next door too. I labeled a folder, my second chance, and started learning again. Algebra, with a baby on my lap, and you haven't lived until you've done fractions while someone chews on your hair. Christopher called from Singapore the next week, his voice careful like he didn't want to step on anything fragile. And he asked if we were safe and warm, and if Mrs. Patterson had told me how the security system worked, and I said yes to all of it, and he said he could feel the house from a continent away. It felt different. It felt alive, and I told him the truth. I was trying to earn what I had been given without turning it into a debt I could never pay, and he said, "You don't owe me, you owe the chance you're taking." By the time he came home, 5 weeks later, unannounced at 3 in the afternoon like a movie deciding to be real, I had the kitchen gleaming and the photos dusted and arranged so their memories didn't feel like a museum. I had made a little nursery by my room, with a crib I bought carefully, and a list of every purchase in a binder, because poor people learn to document their worth. And when he opened the door and set down his suitcase and took in the lemon and lavender and the sound of Hope laughing at his face, he said, "Please call me Christopher," and I handed him my binder anyway, because trust should be visible, and he didn't even flip through it. He just smiled small and said, "I trust you," and offered me a real job, household manager, a salary time to study. And I said yes with tears that wouldn't embarrass me, not now, not after everything. The twist hit the next morning. His brother Thomas arrived like a courtroom. No knocking, and looked at me like a problem to solve, he said. You gave your keys to a stranger with a baby, and I said, my name is Simone, and your brother asked for my name before he asked for anything else, and he asked my qualifications, and I said, I can run a house this size because I've been running crisis for months. Vendors' schedules, budgets, repairs, a teething baby at 2 a.m., a man's grief at 2 p.m. I will not lie or steal if I break something. I replace it. If I don't know, I learn by breakfast. And he said, show me, so I did every label in the pantry, every plant on a watering schedule, every window that needed a lift to open. The sunroom angled 2 feet to catch light without fading the fabric. And by the time we circled back, Thomas rubbed the edge of Rebecca's chair like he was touching a shoulder and said, I'm sorry, I was wrong, which is a sentence men do not say often enough, and I exhaled for the first time in hours. Then the phone rang with the kind of caller ID that makes good mothers choke. Child and family. Services a report. A home visit set for 2 in the afternoon, and all the old shame tried to climb back up my throat, the shelters, the looks, the fear that someone could call me unfit with a pen stroke. Because poverty is loud and love is quiet, and I told Christopher and Mrs. Patterson, and we prepared like truth needed an outline. I printed my GED progress. I wrote feeding times in the margins. I put receipts in order. And when Ms. Karen Williams walked the rooms, she watched hope reach for me without prompting, and checked the crib and the outlets and the fridge and asked about my plan and my support, and whether the person who left us would ever try to come back. And Christopher spoke for the pieces that were his to explain, and kept quiet when I needed to carry my own voice. And the whole time I knew someone at the park had recognized me and decided a wealthy man must be coercing a desperate woman, because that's easier to believe than grace, you know what I mean? And when Ms. Williams closed her folder, she said, your daughter is thriving. This home is safe. Your plan is solid. I'm closing the case, and I sat at the kitchen table and cried into a dish towel and let it be holy. That night, the hardest conversation of all, not with Thomas, not with social services, with Christopher across the island, while steam rose from mugs. We were too tired to drink, I said. There's a power imbalance. You pay me, I live here. We have feelings neither of us wants to disrespect if we cross a line. I lose my job and my home in one breath. And he nodded like he had already said it to himself and said, then we fix the power. You get independent for real, and we wait 6 months, finish the GED. Take the certificate courses, build a portfolio of the rooms you've transformed, save money, find your own place, and then, if we still want the same thing, we start from equal ground. And I said yes, even though it scared me, because fear is not the same as a no. Those 6 months looked ordinary from the outside. Online classes in the afternoon, while Hope napped clients from the park who needed kitchens to breathe again. Invoices sent with shaky hands that got steadier every week, pennies hitting an account, like raindrops you can finally count on. And when I signed a lease on a small 2-bedroom 15 minutes away, I felt equal parts proud and wrecked, and Christopher tried to say I didn't have to go, but I said, I do, I need to know. I can stand on my own so that any leaning we do later is a choice. And he nodded and carried boxes and revealed a stone fountain in the garden with a plaque that read, for Rebecca, who believed in second chances, and for Simone, who proves they're possible. And I cried the way you cry when your past and your future hold hands and decide to stop fighting. After I moved, he took me to dinner. Not boss and employee, not housemates, just 2 people who had walked through a storm the right way. And we didn't make promises the night couldn't keep. We just talked about building something careful and honest, how to balance my growing design work with his company, how to honor Rebecca without turning love into a museum, and how to keep hope at the center of everything without setting ourselves on fire. And we went home separately and slept well because boundaries can be a pillow when they're made with respect. That's the story, condensed the way you asked. A stranger stops in a storm, a house wakes up, a brother tests the edges. A clipboard tries to measure a mother's love and fails a plan, turns dependence into choice. And the ending is soft by design. No fireworks, just dinner and a door held open for whatever comes next. So tell me, do you call what Christopher did reckless or right? Would you have handed over your keys or driven past? Was that call to child services, protection, or prejudice? And if you've ever had someone bet on you when you had nothing left, drop the moment below, hit subscribe. If second chances matter where you live, and tell me where you're watching from so I can say hey when it rains again.